bootstrap myself into the system,
Uh-huh.
then I would need to know the creator for sure.
Okay.
So like at the top of every like header, like or at the top of every file that I check in,
Mm-hmm.
there's typically the author name at the very top, because it tells me, you know, who wrote it. So like, for example, just 2 weeks ago, I was looking through some old networking code that Tim Sweeney had written, and I didn't know he wrote it until I looked at the top of the file, and I was like, oh, Tim Sweeney wrote it.
I see.
So knowing that is important, but I think looking back,
Mm-hmm.
it's less important.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, if the game's already shipped, like, you know, at that point,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess credits are important, you know, to know for, if you're looking for a job or if you're trying to get royalty payments, then yes.
What else is in that file header?
Okay, so typically in a good file header, you'll have the author name,
Mm-hmm.
the date that the original check-in date for the file. You'll have a revision date. That's really important. If that file is associated with a particular change list or a set of change lists, I'd want to know the change list numbers at the top of the file. A basic description of the file contents
Mm-hmm.
is super important. Not every programmer does that, but it is really important. Also, if you're including special libraries or if you're including other files, I'd want to know that at the very top,
Mm-hmm.
which files you're referencing, or if you have like a forward declaration of other classes that you're trying to work with, then I'd want to know, what are you forward declaring for me?
Right.
What am I inheriting from, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I think that's typically what hardware information. So if it's a low level, so this is where it kind of splits off a little bit. If it's like a gameplay file, that's not as important.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like a low level system, I'd want to know, is this for like Windows platform? You know, what chipset? Am I dealing with an 8086, x86 chipset? Am I dealing with an x88 chipset, x80, blah, 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 blah?
Mm-hmm.
You know, am I dealing with like an AMD framework versus, something else?
Yeah.
It sounds like a bunch of that is pretty standard software stuff. Is there anything in there that's unique to games?
Oh,
Not that I don't want you to think that the information was bad. It was great. But I just wonder, it sounds like it's software. Is there anything unique you need to know about a file because it's games?
Like a source code file?
Well,
or just a file in general?
Any we happen to be talking about the header. The header is what made me think of this, but anything else?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was in the context of the header. I guess, yeah, so, so typically if you're writing, for example, if you're creating data-driven levels, so like if your level designers are generating files that need to be read into the engine in order to generate, the levels for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, you'd want to know the version, what version of the game that file is intended for. So that typically there's like a version stamp
Mm-hmm.
at the top that needs to be read in, because you want to make sure that there's compatible information specifically with that particular instance of the game.
Right.
So there's the version number. Then there's typically like a GUID or like a unique identifier.
Uh-huh.
And usually that's because that's hashed in somewhere, and then, there's like some back-end stuff in order to read that file in, and that's usually unique to the game.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, so I'm going to break this off a little bit. The other thing is, for example, if you're working on a specific system for the game, like the audio system,
Mm-hmm.
and you're composing like, you have like certain compositions that are associated with that particular audio system, you'd want to know the composer's information. So you want to know like the composer name, the score information. So they'll have like certain like megahertz or hertz information. They'll have like frequency information in there that's very specific to that game's audio. And that's all in the back end. So that's all like, those are files that are just sort of like data that the game uses to be able to build the experience for the player.
Right.
So it's a lot of identifying information.
Okay. So when you think about all these different artifacts and documents, we want to know a little bit more about like how these are sort of like stored and shared internally, right? So you talked about the wiki, for instance, and you talked about some of these, like file names and headers. How are these typically stored within the company? And we are talking about like both physical and digital. Although I assume like a lot of things are digital these days.
Yeah.
Where are they stored and how do you access these things?
So typically we have source control. So if it's like source files, we'll have like a source control management system like Perforce.
Mm-hmm.
Is a really good source control system. Or Git. We use Git is Perforce is a wrapper around Git, so we use Git quite a bit. And then for like things like art documents or art, like let's say like a concept artist is giving us like art for to be implemented. Usually Shotgun is an application that we use. And then, or there's other like I've seen artists use Dropbox quite a bit. Like they'll just put up, the art files on Dropbox. That's not specific to Epic, but that's very much an artist-centric workflow. Is they'll toss things over the fence, especially like concept artists. So any like intermediary file sharing system, and then typically they'll try to archive that Dropbox for the team. That's later. And then like internally we'll use like different file systems like Google Drive will host a lot of like, game design documents or like if we have like technical design documents. We also have that new content management system, which I hope soon enough you guys are going to help us with. Sorry, I just gotta put that in there. I know this is being recorded, so. Anyway.
So how do you know these when they're tossed in the Dropbox? Is there a naming convention that you use? How do you know what you've received? How do you inventory what you've got?
Yeah, that's the hardest. Yeah, that's the hardest part. So typically we try to get artists to follow some kind of a naming convention that's typically like, it's usually like some kind of, we say, can you give us the date, like in the file name? So like they'll, whatever. So if it's like December 27th, 2018, 12/27/2018, and then wherever they put that, and then we want the date, we want the asset name, so whatever the name of the asset is, and then typically we'll want some like state information in that file name. So like if it's like pre-draft, we want pre-draft. If it's draft, we want a draft. If it's, like something that's meant to ship, ship, we want state information on there. So date, name, state. And then usually that lives in a folder that's related to the game. So like it'll be like game name, and then underneath that they'll have like whatever phase we're in the game. So if we're like in milestone 1, we'll go game name M1, and then the art, like concept art, and then it'll have all the information on there.
Right. So, because you probably have like a lot of different teams working on the project together, does